Dr. Susan Stewart works with, at least through the end of the year, I believe, with Christian Veterinary Missions, worked throughout the world in various places, over 20 countries she's engaged with, spent a significant time in Bolivia, and I believe is currently based in Myanmar right now, is on a sabbatical, and her topic this morning is From Chaos to Transformation, Leveraging the Unexpected for Positive Community Impact. Please welcome Susan Stewart.
And don't sit down yet. Thank you. Thanks. Don't sit down yet. You can stand back up. Just let's shake it off a little bit, okay? Let's, I don't know about you, but I have a really hard time having to sit down for a long time and listen to talking heads. So I apologize, I'm going to be another one, but shake it off a little bit. Move around, just do a little dance. Yeah, good, up in the air, whatever it takes to get your energy, your blood flowing. Okay, now you can sit down. I'm absolutely delighted to be here this morning. I have had a history with Echo. I don't think the Prices know or remember me, but when I was a young development worker working in Bolivia, I had an invitation to attend Haiti Health and Ag and attended a session they did on rooftop gardens that I remember to this day. I remember some of the photos, and yesterday on the farm tour, it was like going back in time for me because initially my first husband, Mark, and I, both veterinarians, both with CVM, went off to Bolivia in 1988, but what does a Colorado girl know about tropical agriculture? I mean, really. And so I went with a very open mind and an open heart, and I knew I didn't know anything about even livestock in the tropics, and there were so many people there who taught me so much, but part of the step back in time of going to the farm yesterday was all of those techniques and ways of working, technologies were things that we also worked with people to put in place in Bolivia. And during the years in Bolivia, I was also exposed to the Freirean approach to participative learning and development. And while I was there, we worked a lot. I guess you could say nowadays, the kind of work we did in Bolivia is called integral mission or integral development. But in the process of working with people around their livestock and their farm systems, I started to think about what's going on. Why are some people successful and some communities successful and why not others? And I especially noticed what happened when farmers were in cooperatives and their own organizations, their own leaders. Many times those fell apart, and that had a really big impact on the success or failure of their production and their farms. And so I got interested in a field called organization development and did some further training. And so about 20 years ago, I essentially walked out of veterinary medicine and into the field of organization development. And about 14 years ago, I went to live in the country of Myanmar, which is in Southeast Asia. It was formerly called Burma. You may have heard recently there's been a lot of news because they just had some elections there. And about a year ago, we came home from Myanmar, and I have been blessed to have about a one-year learning sabbatical. By the way, many of us who work in development work all the time, and we don't necessarily take time to pause and step back and reflect. So I highly recommend, if you have the space to create a learning sabbatical, to do so. Anyway, I'm very grateful to Rick Burnett for inviting me this morning, because in a way it's forced me to pull together a lot of the things I've been reflecting on and learning about to be able to try to create something coherent to share with you. I hope that I'm not projecting on you some need that I have, and it isn't just for me. I hope that this will be valuable. And I really hope that for some of you, this may cause you to pause and maybe even rock your world a little bit. But let's see. So when you think about the world that you occupy, that you live in, how do you see the world? How do you think about it? Maybe you feel it's a little predictable. You stay here at the hotel, you go back to your room in the evening, turn on the light switch, the light will come on. You want to use your cell phone to call somebody, the phone will work. Tomorrow you'll go off to work. Your kids will go to school every day. Pretty predictable. Turn on the TV, you'll get to watch your favorite TV show. What do you think? Is that how you see the world? Pretty predictable? As a scientist in agriculture, many times science teaches us that the observable world is predictable. Just imagine, you think about it, you apply fertilizer and the crops will grow, you apply insecticide and pests will disappear. If we plan and prepare the land, we plant, we care for the crops, we'll have a good harvest that we can eat and sell, and we'll have income from which we can take care of our family and expand the farm. Based on this idea that things are predictable, we create experiments and models, we predict demand, we build whole farm systems around our ability to predict that things will be about like they have been before, right? Right? We think in terms of things being fairly predictable. So think about this, though. How many of you here have been involved with some kind of major disaster, like a hurricane or a major earthquake or a drought? David mentioned Ebola, a plague, a flood, a massive drought. If you've been involved in or involved in the aftermath of a major disaster, raise your hand. Okay, let's see who, look around there. Okay, so we have maybe more than a third of the people here who have had some kind of involvement in a major disaster. How about something that, a disruption that is maybe not, it's more regional or local, maybe a flood or crop failure because of insect disease or drought, or maybe a coup, a change of government in some way, or a land invasion or some kind of uprising or social change? That smaller level, how many have been involved in that? Yeah? Maybe a fewer people said that, but if you combined it all together, I would say many of us here have had some kind of experience of disruption, either personally or with people who we love. So one of the things we do in our own minds is think about where does disruption, like the massive ones, like this is a picture from the cyclone Nargis in Myanmar a few years ago. Smaller, more regional disruptions. How do we see those kinds of things? Where does these sorts of disruptions fit into thinking about our life being predictable? In truth, we think we can predict what will happen, but much of what happens is actually random and unpredictable. You know, I don't know if you ever heard this, but I remember when I was young being told that we could never have another Great Depression because they'd fix things in the economic system. And then in 1987, there was something called Black Monday, where the Dow Jones Industrial dropped 50% in one day, and there was a global crash. In Myanmar, the magnitude of Cyclone Nargis could never have been predicted. 240,000 people lost their lives, and millions lost their homes. And you know, there's positive things that are unpredictable too. There's a fun book called The Tipping Point by Malcolm Gladwell. And it talks about a lot of things, positive things that are unpredictable. Things like some kind of clothing or shoes that all of a sudden become really popular and just sell out. Knowledgeable people, did you know that knowledgeable people predicted the computer would never have value in society? Yeah, we laugh now, but they did. So who would have predicted a few years back that the market for meat in the West would drop so precipitously when people turned to more plant-based and low-fat diets? Probably no one. And how about the system of rice intensification, SRI? Y'all know about SRI? Who would have imagined that one French Jesuit worker working with rice in his garden could find a totally different way to grow paddy rice that increased yields exponentially with no added inputs? Who would have imagined? So how do you see disruptions like this? Do you see it as anomalies? Or do you see disruptions as the way the world works? Do you see bad things in the unpredictable? Or do you see God? You know, there's big value for us in simplicity and the idea of predictability. If we see things as simple and predictable, we feel secure and we can get on with life. And we can't really grasp the whole entirety of a very complex situation, right? So we divide it all up into parts and pieces so that we can get some sort of sense of the whole. It's clearer when things are simple, how we should work, how we should plan. And it's also possible to get together as a group and say, this is our goal. These are a few actions we can plan around. Let's move towards those actions. So when things are simple, a group is able to drive towards their fairly simple purpose and align around that purpose and goals. So it serves us. I want you also to think a little bit about this word we're always talking about, sustainability. Isn't there sort of an underlying element of predictability in the word sustainability? It's kind of an interesting thing to think about. And on the top of that, we like it. It makes us feel comfortable when things are fairly simple. And disruption is scary. It can be really scary, right? It takes a lot of resources when we have a big disruption, and it can really distract us. Something like a big storm or a big change like in our village, like people moving in, such as refugees, or a big change in government like Canada and Myanmar have experienced this year. These kinds of things can be very confusing. I remember after Nargis, after the storm had died down and we had gotten pretty involved in relief efforts, I remember that for myself personally, it was fairly confusing. What do I do now? Everything's different, right? So it can be scary, and sometimes if we try something new in the face of complexity and disruption, we can win really big, but we can also fail really big. So it can be scary, but you know what? There is also value, a lot of value, in seeing disruption and complexity as the way things are, and as part of the creative aspect of our lives and the creative aspect of God. You know that disruption actually creates a space for transformation? I firmly believe that it was because of Nargis that now Myanmar is an emerging democracy. But most people don't see disruption that way. even on the small scale, so the change of the government system, that's the mega scale. On the smaller scale, the disruption of the storm created a much larger space for the voice of women in Myanmar. And so now, even something as simple as putting locks on doors in refugee camps is preventing rape and violence against women now in Myanmar. And that voice came out as a result of the massive destruction of the cyclone. It's kind of an interesting to think about. So disruption creates a space for transformation. Also, when there's disruption, there's a really big space for creativity and innovation that maybe was suppressed or controlled in the past. And I personally see God's signature all over this. God is immensely creative. What did Peter say this morning? God created, right? God is immensely creative and has created, Glenn said that, sorry. Or Jean said that, sorry. God is immensely creative, and we're created in God's image. What does that tell us? So we'll get back to that, but not only are we made to be creative, but in Galatians we're told we're responsible to do our creative best with our lives. I have been very moved by a friend named Pew Pew in Myanmar, who is a wonderful example. She's a committed Christian, and she was driven post-Nargis to step out in creativity to make her country better for everyone. A few years ago, we gave her training as a leadership development trainer, and she's the head now of a large network of organizations, and she ensures that there's many resources available for leadership development training in Myanmar. She was honored this year by our United States State Department as a Global Woman of Courage because of her work in advocacy and social justice, and because in the times of real persecution in Myanmar, she and her organization have boldly stepped out, even in the face of death threats, for social justice there. She's a committed wife and mother of 3 beautiful children, and her network is growing. There's now over 150 organizations involved. And so she's creating a space through that network for others to also step out and use their creativity and lead creatively. So in the case of Pew Pew and her network, Jen, the disruption of Nargis created a space for her and for many people in Jen to exercise their creativity. You know, it does take a lot of us and many different people with many different points of view to solve complex problems. And it's often very challenging to bring together people who are really different, with different points of view and different opinions, right? So disruption often creates the opportunity that people say, okay, things have got to change. They can't stay the same. And they'll be willing to work across boundaries and across differences on something that has been considered an unsolvable problem. So we're taught as scientists that the world is predictable. We say medicine will treat disease. Intensive farming will feed the world. How many have heard that? Tomorrow the weather will be good. The stock market can never crash. We can prevent our community from exposure to AIDS and drugs. If we're good parents, our children will live great lives. And if we love Jesus, all good things will come to us. But we know there are many people who don't respond to medicines as predicted. Intensive farming causes serious problems with land and water contamination. An earthquake can change the weather, or a forest fire for that matter. The stock market has crashed since the Depression era. And all communities have people living with HIV and drug and alcohol abuse. And our children are entirely unpredictable I would say, from personal experience. So, although there are some simple things in the world is not simple. The world is not predictable. The unexpected will happen. You know, from the time of creation, we've seen the unexpected. A flood in Noah. A drought drove Abraham to Egypt. The Babylonians took Israel into captivity. The temple was destroyed. How about Jesus? Jesus is about as unpredictable as possible. Who would have imagined the impact that Jesus has had on the world? And on the other hand, Hitler, unpredictable. In the US, we had a big hurricane, Katrina, that wiped out much of the city of New Orleans. Sri Lanka and the surrounding area had a massive tsunami that killed 230,000 people in 14 countries. In the US, we had the 9/11 World Trade Center devastation and war in many countries, among them the Sudan and Syria, has left whole countries full of refugees and internally displaced people. And in Myanmar, we had a rapid and unpredictable change from a very repressive military regime to an emerging democracy. No one could have predicted it. No one could have predicted any of those things. So, are you able to see God in the unpredictable? Are you able to see God in the massive disruption? God created the earth. Now that was disruption, right? God is creative, and we're made in God's image, so we're creative. And creativity generally leads to unpredictability. So I want you to take a couple of minutes and talk with the person next to you. Do you have a story of when you have seen disruption create something new and something positive, lead to positive change? Peter just told us about the Peace Corps worker. I wonder if there hadn't been that massive drought, if she would have done all that beautiful gardening work. Do you have a simple story, maybe in your personal life or on a larger level? Turn to the one person next to you and tell each other very quickly that story. Can you think of one? If you haven't already switched to the other person, make sure you both have a chance to tell. Okay, I'm sure that you have a lot to tell with each other. One of the things that happens is once you start to feel comfortable with the idea that disruption and unpredictability is just normal, then you can start to make all sorts of connections with things that you've seen happening, things that are coming into place and emerging around the world. It's very exciting. There's one other element to this idea of unpredictability and change, and that is, how do you feel in the face of change, you personally? When change is happening, when disruption is happening, when things aren't going your way, how do you personally respond to change? So, some of us are confused. I mentioned I was in the face of that massive disruption in Nargis. Others maybe are energized and excited and joyful because they see possibility. And still others might feel scared, concerned, even angry about, there's this change happening. Here's what Dilbert says. Dilbert's sort of in the middle. Change is great, you go first. So where are you in all this? Let's just imagine we have a scale from 0 to 100. Okay, 0 or 1 would be, oh no. Yeah, change is coming. I don't like change. And 100 would be, whoopee, oh boy, time to change again. So where are you on that scale of 0 to 100? Pick a number for yourself. Put yourself on that scale somewhere. Here we go. Where do you see yourself on that scale? Just note it down, okay? Note it down. Now, it can be different depending on the kind of change we're talking about, right? Depends on the context sometimes. But in general, your style when you think about change, where do you put yourself on there? Raise your hand if you are around in the segment from 0 to 35. Raise your hand in there. Okay, we have a few people here. Look around, because it's actually very helpful when you're going to work together with other people. Raise your hand if you're in that 0 to 35. Okay, get an idea. Okay. So how about, and what we can do is we can call the group in 0 to 35 conservers, okay? How about the 35 to 65? If you fall in 35 to 65, raise your hand. Okay, look around, get an idea, okay? We can call the 35 to 65 group the pragmatists, okay? And how about if you fall in the 65 to 100 range? Raise your hand, look around, okay? All right. Isn't that interesting? We have about a third here. And that actually surprises me a little bit, because aren't we all in the business of change? Yeah. So typically with a group who work in development and missions, usually people are way on the upside of the scale. But anyway, this is the more natural distribution of the population of the Earth, is to be fairly evenly divided along the scale. You have the conservers, the pragmatists, and we can call the top group the originators. So the conservers, what would you say you're like? What's your style in the face of change? How do you feel in the face of change? Anybody who's a conserver? Anxious, yeah, don't really like change. Like that predictability, maybe? Yeah? Anybody else?
Only like change if we're in control of it.
Oh, yeah. Want to have the control, maybe even want to have some experimentation and proven results. There's got to be a good reason to make the change, right? How about pragmatists? What's your style like in the face of change? How do you feel about change? Anybody who's in the middle 35 to 65 range? Yeah?
I'm old enough that I don't want to die, and then also I want to survive civilization collapse.
Okay. Okay. So I want to survive. So is some change okay for you? You? You want change or you don't want change? You want big change. Okay, so I want big change. This is a pragmatist for you, right? I want big change, but I don't want to die in an automobile accident, right? So the pragmatist is, yeah, kind of, I'm willing to really consider change and even big change, but, let's talk about it some too, okay? How about people in the 65 to 100 range? What did I say they were called? Originators. What's your style? How do you feel about change?
Change energizes.
Oh, yeah, I get energy around change. Opportunity. Yeah? Back there?
What could possibly go wrong?
Yeah, okay, good. Yeah, that's a true originator back there. Right. Yes, in the back. Bring it on. Okay. These are some true originators. Enjoy taking risks, right? So think about this, though. This whole scale is the spectrum that God's created in us, right? And the points along the scale, all the people along the scale, they are also treasured and valued creations of God, right? So if I'm a conserver in the 0 to 35 range, how do I see those people out there in the 65 to 100 range?
Wildlife radicals.
Right. Anyone else?
Careless or reckless?
Reckless. Boy, do they ever disrupt stuff, right? Yeah? And how about if you're in the 65 to 100 range? How do you see those conservers down there? Stuck in the mud. Right, exactly. And how about the people in the middle, the originators and the conservers? How do you see those pragmatists in the middle?
Wise.
Yes, wise, and sometimes maybe wishy-washy.
What analytical?
Analytical, pardon? Might be suspicious, and maybe also hard to make up their mind. But the interesting thing to me is always people who are down around the 0 to 35, especially down around the very low numbers, they're going to see pragmatists just the same as people who are at 80 or 95, right? And so they'll see them as risk takers and disruptors. Whereas people who are up here around the 95 and 100, they're going to see pragmatists as sticks in the mud, right? They're going to see them just like conservers. So just think about that, right? The whole range was created by God. The whole range is valuable to us. And if for example, I'm an originator out here, why do I need the conservers? Why do I need them? Yeah, to ask those realism questions, to also give me insights into how this might impact a larger population if we do this change and take this risk, right? So if I'm a conserver down here, why do I need those originators up there? Make me bolder? Uh-huh.
Nothing would ever get done if it were up to a conservative one.
Nothing would ever get done. It's kind of an interesting thing. Yes, all the regular stuff would get done, but we wouldn't necessarily have those bold, striking moves, right? And how about, why do we all need the pragmatists? Maybe to mediate, maybe to help us come together through the scale, right? So there is a richness in this scale, and there is a beauty in it, but you can imagine probably what I'm going to say. Where you are on that complexities or on that change style scale affects how you view disruption, right? Because the originators are going to say, oh boy, here's an opportunity for transformation. And the conservatives are going to say, Let's go back to the way it was before. Let's just fix it. It's just a temporary thing to control. Let's go back to the way it was before, right? But here's the thing. Just because that's your preference of how you want to be, you don't have to choose that every time, right? If you know the whole range and you know the other people you're working with, where they are on the range, that gives us such a space for grace and understanding of one another and the ability to work together, because we can value and appreciate the other people who are on our team, in our community, or maybe who are in a different aspect of the work that we're engaged in, right? So think about that. Think about that. How do you respond in the face of disruption? What's your choice? I remember being fascinated by the history of SRI when I first heard about it, the system of rice intensification. And the person who introduced it to me, an agronomist from Bangladesh, said, you know, in the beginning, IRRI, the International Rice Research Institute, said, oh, no. This can never be. No. There's one way to raise paddy rice, and this is the way, right? Whereas, he said, at Cornell University, the Extension Service said, isn't this interesting? This is a totally different way to see paddy rice production. Maybe there's something in that. Maybe we need to do some further experimentation and see what else is going on with that, right? So we have a choice in how we respond to something as disruptive as a whole new way of thinking about the way we raise paddy rice. In Myanmar, it was interesting following Nargis. We had the same kind of thing. There was a whole group of people who said, this is a big storm, a one-time event, massive destruction, but let's control it, let's mitigate the negative impact. Whenever you hear mitigate, that word mitigate around disaster, look around for the conservers, right? Because they're saying, as soon as we can, let's go back to the way things were before. But there were a lot of people in Myanmar who said, this is an opportunity for change. We don't have to go back the way we were before. So many organizations, local organizations, sprang up following the disturbance in order to help people who were in need. And then they continued on. They got experience, they continued working together. They were emboldened because they weren't punished by the military for working together. And so a lot of change sprang out of that. So you have a choice. Every time you're faced with the possibility of disruption and change, you have a choice. How are you going to act? Okay, so I just got the 5-minute warning, and here's the problem. I am a person of ideas, obviously. I love this realm of ideas, but I'm also a person of action. And I think the most important part of this talk is the action part. So if I don't actually get through it, then come to the speaker session this afternoon and we'll talk about how do you make this happen? How do you bring about, how do you leverage yourself for transformation and action and creativity. So where are you in all of this that I've been talking about? What if you see the world as a complex and changing place, and you see chaos and disruption as normal? What can you do with that? So how do we leverage the chaos and the disruption for transformation? How do we create opportunities for creativity to emerge? How do we make our community and our organizations flexible and agile and able to respond quickly in the face of change? Here's something interesting that Martin Luther King Jr. said a number of years ago. Power without love is reckless and abusive. And get this one, love without power is sentimental and anemic. It's precisely this collision of immoral power with powerless morality which constitutes the major crisis of our time. I didn't organize it, but I thought it was unbelievable that the first song we sang this morning was about power, right? Overcoming power, wonderful power, power in the blood. We often talk about love, love, love. And many of us are embarrassed to utilize our power. But every single one of you has both power and both love that you can utilize. So what can we do? What influence can we have in the face of disruption? Are we just victims of the complexity? No. You can leverage your power and your love to bring about transformation. Do you remember yesterday? Trey said something really beautiful. Those who have what is luminous inside them can be sparked into action. Well, each one of you has created in you what is luminous, and it can be sparked into action. Many of you are already acting. So here are a couple of things before time is completely up that you can think about. Because I hear, as I hear your stories, I hear that many of you are already acting in the face of disruption or to cause disruption. So one of the things you can do is create the disruption. Create it. All through the Bible, there are examples of people who stepped out in love and in power to create disruption. Think of Ruth, think of Rahab, think of Deborah. All three of them stepped out beyond what was the norm for them, used their power and their love, and created disruption. In fact, Ruth and Rahab are both in the genealogy of Jesus. It's kind of interesting, isn't it? One of the things I was trained to do as a veterinarian was ask, what's the problem? So what's the problem here? And then when I went to Bolivia, I learned about the approach to community development, where you say, well, what's the problem? Well, why does that happen? Well, why does that happen? Why does that happen? To try to dig down to the root cause of the problem, right? You've heard that, right? That's what we're supposed to do? Well, I challenge you that it's actually far more effective. Instead of asking, what's the problem? Ask questions that spark possibility. How might we see this differently? What would happen if several of us got together who saw the situation entirely differently and started generating ideas? Where have you seen transformation come out of chaos? Ask questions that spark possibility. This helps to create the disruption. It helps people to start thinking in new and different ways. Let your creativity go wild. That's part of you. This is a bizarre one, right? If you're a specialist, partner with a multi-potential person. A multi-potential person is someone who jumps around from job to job, kind of like, a vet who becomes an organization development specialist and a leadership developer. There are some people who jump around from one area to another, and others who specialize. So if you're a specialist, partner with a multi-potential person. You're going to start seeing the world differently. And one challenge I want to give you is every week, every day is better, but every week, sit down with somebody who sees the world very different from you. Go outside the range of people who are your colleagues and your friends, and really talk about how things are and how they see the world. Get curious about them and be willing to step out there and share who you are. You're going to start seeing the world in a different light. You're going to start to create the disruption. We have a lot of possibilities with technology now to spark magnificent creativity. And tomorrow afternoon, if you haven't heard of a hackathon, that's a space where all sorts of different people come together to work on solutions for challenging and difficult, unsolvable problems. So tomorrow afternoon, we don't really have time to do a real hackathon, which usually lasts 2 or 3 days. But tomorrow afternoon, we're going to have a short agri-hackathon. So I welcome you to come, bring your problems. Let's see what we can create and support to emerge. So you might want to think in ECHO as well. I see ECHO as an organization that encourages emergence, that causes the disruption, that brings divergent people together, which is one of the other ways to spark disruption is to span boundaries. I see ECHO as an organization that does that. You might want to think about your conferences and how you could also, in addition to doing lectures and talks, think about how can we create spaces in the conference that are free spaces or hackathon spaces where different people can come together to actually work on real-time, real-life issues and problems that they're dealing with. Might be a nice addition. Okay, so my time is up, and now I'm moving into your break time, and I know you don't want that. So I'm going to end there, and we can go into see all these other actions, things that you can do to create disruption, to transform chaos into positive community development. And let's see here, go. There's the last slide. Here are a few things if you like to read philosophy, read Anti-Fragile by Nassim Taleb. Engaging Emergence is a very, very practical book on how do we leverage chaos for transformation. The Chaos Imperative by Ori Brafman. So these are all some kinds of things you can read if you're interested. And just think about this. Think about this. Where are you around disruption? Can you see God in it? Can you see that God is creative and you are created in God's image? So you also have the potential to create the disruption and to move into the disruption in a positive way. There's a new future out there. What is it? Thank you.